So we are here today talking to Mr. Cleveland Sellers III, talking about We're Black in Business. So kicking off NAACP week here at the University of North Carolina in Richmond. So the goal of this session really is to talk about minority representation in corporate America, obstacles, challenges, or what do you see as kind of the new trend shifting into maybe your field of work or maybe in general, minority representation in just business in general. So let's start. As I was preparing for this interview, I see that we do have a commonality. You are a proud graduate of an HBCU.
That's right. Correct. Morehouse College. Yeah.
Absolutely. So I am not an HBCU grad. However, after further digging, I know that you are an English major. So was I in my undergraduate years.
I am an English major. That was my major to identify that I really had no idea what I was going to do or be. But I knew that I enjoyed to write, I enjoyed public speaking, um, and I enjoyed to read. So the English major was perfect for me.
Absolutely. So my question is twofold. So looking back, I know you said this is kind of your exploratory
Yeah.
major. So when you went to college, did you find yourself using what you loved as your passion as your driver for your major, or do you feel the value of your major now that you're in business?
Wow. Good question. So, in college, I thought originally I wanted to go into television broadcast. I wanted to do what most young athletes want to do, which is go off and go to Bristol and be a sports commentator on ESPN, right? I
Mhm.
was the next Stephen A. and all those guys. Um, Reality hit, and I realized that I really needed to look at um, the shifts in the market where were the focus areas for corporations and for really the global economy, right? Where do I fit based on my skill set to do a couple things. One is make an impact. I've always been from my parents, my dad, Dr. Cleveland Sellers Jr., my mom, Gwen Sellers. I was always raised to first think about the community and
Mhm.
where I can drive influence and impact. So I wanted to look at the global economy and say, where do I fit so I can, number one, make an impact? And then two is what all young people and college students think about and want to do, and that's make a lot of money. And I decided that technology was that space for me. Um, the challenge was I really didn't have a technology background, right?
Mhm.
I didn't make that decision until late, probably into my junior year. And I'd spent years in English thinking maybe I'll get into education administration, and then switching at the last minute. I fortunately connected with our career development department at Morehouse College and sat down with a young lady. True story, I didn't even know where the building was. No idea. I heard students talk about it, but I'd never been. I was I was that last minute guy that walked in and said, I'm graduating in a year, help. And so we had a couple conversations, and I said, I really want to try to dip my toe into technology. What should I do? And it's all about no matter what your skill set, and we'll talk a little bit more about this, or your background is, being able to communicate and articulate, and more importantly, make connections with people. And I ended up interviewing with IBM. Long story short, there was an initial discussion with the IBM team. There were probably 50 seniors and juniors in the room. They were all dual degree, majoring in computer science, business. And of course, I sat in the back of the room because I came from football practice late. And we had to go around and give our name, major, and something about ourselves. And literally after hearing 49 people articulate the power of computer science and business, I was the only guy and the last person to say, I'm an English major, right? I don't have this skill set. However, what I can do is I know how to build relationships, I know how to communicate, and I'm passionate about what I do. Immediately after that session, there was an African American executive from IBM that walked directly to me and she said, I like people that are different. I like people that don't come from a certain mold, but have the characteristics and the values that we like. I'd love to interview you tomorrow. So we interviewed the next day. 15 minutes in, she said, I'm going to offer you a job. And, 20 plus years later, I'm sitting in a executive position at Capgemini.
That's so awesome. And surprisingly, one of the advisors for NAACP comes from the Career Center. So we
Yeah,
really try to push utilizing that office. It is a great space. I know when I was an undergrad, that was where I kind of figured out the lay of the land of what I liked through internships or even through those opportunities. So kind of how you got into that industry is very fascinating. And I do believe that communication is essential. So if you can
right.
communicate, you can pretty much go anywhere with your career trajectory.
Absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
I currently in my role, as we were discussing prior to the interview, I do teach that business communication. And then another part of my job is that I'm a director to the Passport to Professional Success program.
Okay.
So the program helps foster those soft skills that our students sometimes miss. So either it's a cultural or social experience for most of our students here at UNC Pembroke. So kind of in reading your bio that was provided to me by Zion, it was mentioned how important exposure was for you as you travel with your
Yeah.
family. So, in that same token, I believe that the cure to ignorance sometimes is just simply exposure. If you
Right.
see other opportunities, those barriers kind of come down or they're almost invisible, and so to speak. So, do you have any strategies for networking and how you kind of broke that mold, even in that first session coming from football practice? How did you kind of take the nerves off? Because I'm sure those computer science kids knew computer science. They really didn't know, okay, how can
Yeah.
I show my true self in network? So can you share a little bit about kind of your networking philosophy or some tips for our students? Because that's sometimes where they wall.
Yeah, and I have to take a step back again, back to my parents and the environment we were raised in. So there are three of us. I've got an older sister, Nosizwe, who is was in medicine, now is in operations at the VA hospital in Columbia, South Carolina. I've got a younger brother, Bakari Sellers, who's in politics and CNN commentator and a lot of author, a lot of other things. One of the things we were always told is that, and what was enforced was really a strong belief around self-confidence and self-worth. Um, Self-worth and self-confidence as being African American, self-confidence and self-worth around my brother and I being Black males and my sister being a Black female, and self-confidence and self-worth around just our value to society and what we as African Americans are able to produce. That's always been really driven into the three of us. So I was never really intimidated, nervous, yes, but not intimidated around different environments or crowds or groups of people until I got to IBM, and we'll talk about that. But around my peers, my peer group, as you talked about, Morehouse is historically Black, so it was all African American young men and women. I didn't care what major they had. I just knew what I could do. And I knew if there was a space available, that I would fit in that space. And then on top of that, I worked hard. I grew up playing competitive sports. I played football in college. I was never the fastest or the strongest or the biggest, but I always knew that hard work would beat talent every day. So I knew I would outwork, my mentality, even today, I will outwork anybody in corporate America. And even back then, I thought the same thing. So I always came in with a certain swagger, confidence, that if there was an opportunity, and you were willing to take a chance, I could do it. what I've learned is that people always like to know um, how it benefits them, right? So even in recruiting and hiring, how does your selection help them? And I learned that early on. So how do I sell myself to be a value for the person that's actually hiring me? So I walked in with confidence. I've always had confidence. Not that there was an inability in anybody else, but I was just sure of what I had. And all it takes, with almost anything, all it takes is one yes, right? Out of a million no's, all you're looking for is one yes. And it just so happened there was one young lady who decided to say yes.
That's awesome. So as a boy mom myself, I see my boys, and I always say it's that alter perception of reality because I see that it's like you're not doing so great, but that confidence kicks in, and they're like, oh, I may not be doing what you think, mom, but I think look at the other stuff that I did that was fantastic. So I
Yeah,
think it's amazing to see in this day and age when kids are they struggle with that particular aspect, but I don't know if it's just the grace of God or whatever it is. That's
it
just
it
my boys are
absolutely is.
all extremely confident, and mom is like, I don't think you did that great, but they're like, yeah, but did
Yeah,
you
I
see
killed
the
that.
others did that? So and they
Yeah.
keep trying and keep pushing. So I am very hopeful that that sticks around and no one kind of tears that piece down because that is definitely what we promote here. Um, in at least in my household. And then when I talk to my minority students, that is what I push your work ethic and ensuring that no one creates that narrative for you. It's all represented by how you act and how you put in the work.
Yeah, and to be completely transparent, I tell Zion and her younger siblings, Cleveland the fourth and Zoe, this all the time. I was not the best student, right? Coming out of high school, probably just average GPA, uh, pretty low SAT scores. Um, I was fortunate to get into Morehouse. After my first year, I was put on academic probation. Was playing football and enjoying moving from the low country of South Carolina, right, Pembroke like area
Mhm,
to Atlanta, Georgia. And reality hit. And my
mhm.
parents told me you can either come back and finish at Voorhees College, which those of you that listen to this, go Google Voorhees College in Denmark, South Carolina. They said you can come to Voorhees College and finish, or you can figure it out and stay where you are. Um, and it was a dose of reality, but what I think the message is, to be successful, sometimes the formula doesn't include what people have associated with success, right? So there are challenges that are real that face all kids in terms of academics and learning. I didn't have that challenge. I had another challenge, but they're real. But you can still succeed, be successful, and also be able to contribute to your environment and to the community. So it wasn't that I was more qualified. It wasn't that I had the highest GPA. Again, it goes back to, are you confident in who you are? And do you have the ability to work? Um, and there is a stigma on this generation, right? Especially the generation that you teach today. Um, Even in corporate America, I hear it all the time, right? That they really don't want to work. They want more money for every little thing. It's just a different mindset. Um, but I think at the end of the day, what everyone is looking for is the work ethic. If you're willing to put in the work, there is opportunity. There's a lot of money, but at the end of the day, it is happiness, right? And more than anything, I wish I would have known this years ago. Although I'm happy in what I do. I think I ended up in the right place, but but on top of money and all the other things, um, happiness is something that you can't place a value on. Doing something you love to do, waking up every morning to do it, going to sleep knowing you're going to wake up and do that again is priceless.
Absolutely. I would agree. And it is, and we both are in professions where it is a prescribed day, but that day never ends up the way that
Right.
you thought it was going to end up just because
Yeah.
of the people that you get to work with every day. So quite interesting that you bring that up. And as a just talking about representation and who we are. When I went to college, you can literally count. I went to a predominantly white institution, and you could literally count the number of Black students.
Yeah.
So it felt as if there was a microscope because as the years progressed and I was there, you saw more and more being immersed into that organization. And we ensured that Black organizations like NAACP or NCNW were represented, especially even the Black sororities were represented at this institution so we could have that voice and that representation. So
Yeah.
it's extremely important to develop that footprint and be happy. And as the both of
It
us have
is.
attested to, we came from different paths, English, and I'm going to do this, and then now I'm here, and it is that being flexible, I think, to that shift of
Yeah.
finding your space and utilizing that foundational work. So even though I don't teach fifth grade English, I still use those same aspects that I've learned, the literature and reading still goes over into where I am. So you don't have to have the major and figure it all out at 18, 19. That's a common misnomer that
Right.
you
Right.
got it all set. I mean, if you count your class members, there's very few that still, man, he majored in this and he's still this
That's right.
person.
That's right. And Keandra, what's interesting is I took a little different path, right? And going to an HBCU,
Mhm.
growing up, um, being a child of the civil rights movement and my father's activism, I was always around usually people that looked and came from communities like me through elementary, high school, and college. So I got very comfortable in that space. So I remember the first couple weeks at IBM, right, as a new hire, and you get in a different space where people don't look like you, they don't have the shared experience, and you are the minority. Now it's three people in a class of 50 that are African Americans. The rest are Caucasians, and the language is different, right? Not just the language, what's talked about, for me, what was talked about in the break room, um, when I was going to play pickup basketball or try to find an adult flag football team, they were playing golf, right? Little things, and you realize, man, that there's a gap.
Mhm.
And then I'm not sure this is really geared for me, towards me. So how do I fit? How do I help myself or prepare myself to fit in this environment without really changing who I am? And so those were some of the initial struggles, I think, for me, going directly into corporate America. I never got an MBA. To be honest, as my dad will say, I've finished undergrad. Thank you, Lottie. Right? It wasn't summa kuma, um, but so I knew that wasn't the right path. So I wanted to know what can I do to maximize what I have, right? And part of that strategy was I've got to fit into an environment um, that doesn't look like the environments I've come out of, and I've got to excel. So it took me a while. It took me a while to figure that out because it's not only the cultural differences, but it's now being in a professional environment where there are demands. And these demands are a little different. It's not if I don't turn in an assignment, I'll get a C or D or an F, but I can email the teacher and get an extended due date. These are deadlines where if you don't meet those deadlines, then stock prices are impacted, right? There's
Mhm.
someone's job that is impacted, including your own. So really just trying to develop that strategy to put me in positions to be successful and excel.
Oh, great. You are in kind of that industry where it is still kind of underrepresented with minorities. So how has that been? I know you talk about going into IBM initially, but how is it now? How have you seen it kind of change, or is it even changing as quickly as some professions that you may
Yeah,
have seen?
so it's a good question. I think we've made a lot of progress, um, but I think we have a long ways to go. Within my organization or Capgemini North America, we're probably at a senior executive level. We probably represent, and I'm just going to give a range, 2, maybe 3% of North America for executives. For general population, we're less than 10. And here's what you have to think about as a whole, right? The majority of organizations, especially IT consulting firms, are now not just North America based, but they're global. What that means is that diversity no longer just means Black and brown people and women and LGBTQ, um, but it takes on a totally different meaning. So when we start looking at numbers of African Americans, you really have to dig deeper to say, so what is our real global corporate diversity strategy? And a lot of times that doesn't really map to what we really push for within North America. So a couple things that means you have to carve out what you want to see. There's always a focus on North America business for any company. So you really have to beat the drum within your geography to say, we need to make change here. Not diluting what they're doing in Europe or Africa or LATAM, but how do we make change in North America? The other thing that we see shifting is I consider myself a consultant, right? So I am a supplier or vendor or partner. I'm not the client, right?
Mhm.
So I support the Boeings and the Kimberly Clarks and the Bank of Americas and the huge corporations. What we see in our clients is a change in diversity, a very, very strong change in diversity. We see more women that are becoming executives in really key positions. If you look at Duke Energy has an African American female that runs supply chain. That is we're seeing it more and more, but that's really unheard of. That's been a job that has been set aside for men. Men run supply chain
Yeah.
because it's kind of engineer, roll your sleeves up. There's an African American woman sitting in that position.
Wow.
So we're seeing the landscape change. The pressure I put and we put within the vendor or partners in the consulting world is in order to do business with clients, we have to look like our clients. And so change is happening. I think there's more work to do, but we definitely see change happening in our environment and in our organizations.
That's awesome. Now, I checked out your company, Capgemini, and you guys have a very interesting commitment statement
Mhm.
to diversity. And I absolutely loved it because it was the first central focus on your website. So if I am applying for a job and I go and look at your website, this
Right.
is the first thing I see, the commitment to diversity. And it reads, racism, discrimination, and prejudice of any kind have no place in our society. As a
Yeah.
multicultural organization present in 50 countries, we are committed to ensuring that diversity and equality are non-negotiable cornerstones of our workplace and in which we live. We are committed to fostering an environment in which we listen, hear, and care for each other. We must stand together. That is an extremely bold statement for an organization to make, and I am absolutely 100% all in. How is this reflected in fostering kind of that next generation of people who, because you love your job, your VP, but you'll retire one of these days. How do you
Yeah.
foster that same, you're building this foundational commitment worldwide within your organization. How do you foster that in the newcomers in your organization or even other organizations? How do you get
Yeah.
people to see that?
So good question. So a couple things. One is that statement is extremely powerful, and some of that is recent, right? You know, with a lot of companies after George Floyd, there was some introspection on what do we want to stand for, right? One of the things I'll tell all students is um, people no longer buy um, the what, right? They're not buying a product. What they're really buying is who. They're buying the values, they're buying what you stand for. It's more than just a product. People really want to buy into a movement. So companies are now standing up to say, what do we want to stand for? And Capgemini was really, I think, courageous and did a great job in making a statement to say this is who we are, right? And this is what will stand for. Because the reality is, we are a global company. I've got
Mhm.
resources all over the world, from Guatemala to um, China to India, Poland, all over. Um, so how do we back it up, right? I think, simply put, we have to be intentional. We really have to be intentional, and that means intentional in looking at MBA hires, right? So how do we continue to infuse diversity of thought into the organization? I think it comes with hiring, number one, young minds to come into the organization, but also diversity comes in different genders, different colors, different shapes. You have to be intentional in diversity. And so for me, my organization, I always try to be intentional. Sometimes to a fault, right? I mean, I'm not afraid to say I need an African American female, right? Or I'm looking for this type of resource. But because the knock on that has been, um, you know, if you say that, then you dilute the outcome of what you're looking for. But on the other side, what that's saying is, if I say I want Keandra to come work for me, what I'm actually saying is, I believe she's just as qualified, if not more, than any other candidate in the pool, right? No matter what she looks like, but you bring a perspective and a thought process, and a history that creates that diversity of thought. So if we don't have that within our organization, we miss something, right? We don't think like we should. Everything we do is about collaboration. Every PowerPoint presentation, every customer meeting that I have, it's all about collaboration and bringing the best minds together. And if you're missing an element, um, then there's no way to have that thought. So I'm very intentional. I think we can do a better job, but I think we're shifting to that. The the pressures of um, making sure you change culture and also achieve revenue targets is real, right? Because it's
Yes.
so easy to go back to what you've done before, um, to gain some level of success and say it worked before, let me keep doing it. What we're saying is, we believe growth takes place when you shift the paradigm,
Mhm.
and you bring in these diverse minds. So I'm actually working with a couple of I can't say the schools, but an MBA program here in the Southeast. Fairly small. They don't get a lot of attention, but they have qualified candidates. So I'm building a partnership with them. Um, which is not an HBCU, and I'm also partnering with an HBCU soon, because I want to be able to pull talent from both avenues, and have a really strong pipeline, because I believe we'll see growth.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great answer because I know it was recently in the news with a top exec, and he mentioned that there was a pipeline issue to the reason why they don't hire so many minorities within their firm. He's in the
it's an
banking industry.
excuse. It's
Yeah.
an excuse.
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely called to the carpet on that because there is this young talent that's there and
Yeah.
present. It's do you go out and seek those individuals or do you cut off the pipeline to that what's been working for years?
Yeah. And the challenge is it doesn't look like it did 20 years ago.
No.
Right? The pipeline doesn't look like that. So they're not young people aren't going to think like we think. They're not going to behave like we behave. But you have to be comfortable with putting yourself in a position to be uncomfortable,
Mhm.
because whether you admit it or not, they are the generation that will run companies, that will lead, that will be vice presidents and CEOs. So we've got to put them in position to lead. And the reality is the market is changing. The
Yeah.
market doesn't look like it did 20 years ago. I was one of those hires. Traditionally, I should never have been offered a job at IBM. Never. I didn't fit the profile. Um, I literally came to the interview in my football sweats because I didn't have time. I did shower, but I had on football sweats, and I didn't really fit. But it takes someone being intentional to really change the narrative, to make a difference. And the difference, again, I'm not trying to change all of North Carolina, right? I'm just trying to
Mhm.
change my business unit, one hire at a time,
Yeah.
and then really enforce to them the importance of reaching back and doing the same thing I did with them.
I completely agree. And it's when we have, even in higher ed, it's like, okay, let's find this token group of students. And I'm like, well, you may have that token group. However, you're missing this population who they may have that 2.5, but they're awesome people.
Right.
So let's not exclude that particular demographic. It doesn't mean that they still can't go and meet the CEO of this company just because they're GPA. So GPA is always, I am the voice of reason on GPA. Like if you have a 4.0, that means you're not doing
GPA
anything
and
else.
and SAT scores
Yeah, that
and
means you're
SAT
not
scores.
doing anything. You're just a great test taker to
Yeah,
me.
yeah, and I'm a firm believer that SAT is really is a biased
Hmm.
um, metrics or measuring system, really because a lot of that is about exposure.
Hmm.
And if you're not exposed, some of those questions are very difficult to answer, right? Doesn't mean you don't have the capacity, right? It just means you haven't been exposed. So another conversation, but I think a good one that we should be having, especially within higher education.
Oh,
I've noticed that
absolutely.
there are a lot of schools that are actually going away from SAT scores in general. Actually, my son Zion's younger brother just committed to play soccer at Notre Dame next year, and
Wow.
they you don't have to submit SAT scores with your
Hmm.
with your application. So I do see the shift, but it's an interesting conversation for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. It is. I think the test holds you back. When I went to school, of course you took the test, but then they had an interview. And I felt so much value in that interview where you just got to
Right,
come to campus and you talked about yourself.
right.
And they ask all types of questions. Here's this little girl from the inner city coming and looking at this big university, and they're like, "Tell me about your school. What are you guys doing?" So, this is back when, public education. You went on field trips and, but they were really interested. And I don't know, I guess that was reverse exposure because they were just, sitting in their big houses. And here I am talking about, yeah, we got
Yeah,
the bus and we went to here. So no, but yeah, I felt so much value in that, like that interview, because it was my ability to showcase,
that's right.
hey,
Yes,
I can do this just because my school says this or I look like this, and I had the grades going into college, but it was one of those I felt so much value, like, okay, not a great test taker, but here I am and I'm talking about
right.
myself and talking about my skills and what I'm willing to do and put in the work. So I'd like to think that helped me get it, but But we'll see. I digest. But so you were in a very unique role here at Capgemini. Tell us about your VP position and kind of what your overall job. I know you said you were really into consulting, but what is the everyday as VP?
Yes, it's a lot of work. It's a lot of work. So if I take a step back, I actually started, I worked for IBM for a little over 20 years. I left IBM, worked for Salesforce out of San Francisco for a short period of time, and then I spent 3.5 years at Teradata doing analytics consulting. So I've always been, I've been an individual contributor salesperson, right? You put me anywhere, I can, I can, I can sell just about anything. That was my mindset. So I've done different types of jobs. Capgemini hired me in January 27th of 2020, so a little
Oh,
more than a year ago, and they hired.
mid pandemic,
Yeah,
almost.
yeah, that's right. So they hired me as an individual contributor. They said, you've got relationships, you've got a lot of experience. We want you to help us grow some of our big clients, right, into bigger clients. Um, and what's interesting is they always tell you you need to be successful 2 years in a role before you look at other opportunities. Um, so um, I did a pretty good job last year in around fourth quarter, so October, November timeframe. I was having one of my weekly conversations with my CEO. One of the things that I encourage all young people to do is make sure, whether it's a professor or the chancellor or anybody, try to have regular interactions, right? It's always helpful to have those interactions before something goes wrong, right? Because something will go wrong inevitably. So when I first started, I reached out to my CEO's admin and I said, schedule this weekly call. I want to make sure we have one-on-one contact. He understands what I'm doing, but more importantly, I understand what he expects of me. And then thirdly, I want to make sure we have a way of measuring success. Right. So every time I got on the phone, hey, you told me to do these three things last week. I did this. Did I accomplish that? Right. So you said if I accomplish these 12 things, then that means that I'm in position to do something else. Right. Um, so I actually accomplished all of that. And at the end of October, I didn't have to go to him and ask. It was just a regular call, and he said, I've got a role that's opening up to run one of the business units in North America. And I want you to work for me and run it. And he said, think about it. Let me know what you want to do. And by December, I was announced as vice president for business services for our consumer packaged goods, retail and distribution industries in North America. So business services for us, and I'll try to not use acronyms, and I'll say an acronym is around BPO, or business process outsourcing. So that's all of your back office process functions, finance and accounting, supply chain, HR, contact center. So we essentially outsource large companies' finance and accounting departments. Um, and so I focus specifically on your consumer packaged goods companies. So all of those companies, General Mills that makes Cheerios and all the brands that all of us eat. There are a number of them out there: Coca-Cola, McDonald's, Pepsi, and the like. So that is my client base. I've got delivery centers because we do. Yeah, it's an interesting dynamic, right? You'll know when I say this, but we basically shift jobs from onshore, from U.S. based jobs to offshore. So I send, jobs to India, Guatemala, Poland, all over the world, in lower cost delivery centers. And especially when you have the impact of COVID, and businesses are struggling financially. And they're looking for opportunities. They're not really selling products. The shift to change the way they sell online is expensive. How do we cut costs? A lot of them came to us and said, we need help. And so we looked at how we could take some of their resources, high cost resources, shift them to skilled resources overseas, and reduce the cost. So that's how I got in the position. I've been I've been doing this for a few months, and report directly to our CEO, who's a great guy, young, 40, he's 45 years old, African, lives between Paris and Dubai, um, and just a really good mentor and friend.
For the good life in between Paris and Dubai. Okay.
Yeah, must be.
Yeah, must be. Okay, so let me get to, we have a couple of student questions. So I want to make sure I'm not taking up
Sure.
with all of my questions.
Okay.
So first question is, what are some of the first few steps a young adult can take to help them be more successful when they get older? So what would you advise a younger person kind of, I know we talked a lot about communication and networking. Any additional things you'd add to that?
Yeah, communication and networking. Right. It's more than that. So number one is, make sure you develop that work ethic, which means that when you're in school, when you're in class, the way you develop the relationships is by producing. Right. There's really no healthy relationship that's one way. A lot of times the notion of networking is misconceived to be you help me. Right. I'll introduce myself. What do you have for me? But networking is always about building a healthy relationship, which is give and take. It means in order for somebody to give to you, you've got to be able to give something to them. So if it's building and so I didn't pick this up early on, but the impact teachers have on your future career, what you do, how you finish is important. So that means developing that relationship. And what would I give to you? It's that I'm a good student. I'm diligent. I'm not gonna make all A's, right? But I'm gonna work hard. If I don't understand, I'm gonna say, can I get some time with you afterwards? Because I want you to see that I really want it, right? And what you give to me is that commitment that you'll work with me, right? Not that you're just going to give me A's, right? But I'm going to help you. And I think we take that mindset into every relationship, and you really never know the power of the network of the people around you, especially in undergrad, right? So get to know students that don't look like you, that don't move the way you move, that are not athletes, that aren't straight A students, but get to know people, because what I can assure you is that there's a group of people in UNC Pembroke right now that are going to go off and do extraordinary things, and they're going to look for people that they remember that were extraordinary people. So are you positioning yourself, to be in that core group, and vice versa, right? My network group in college were my roommates, right? I ended up finding some guys my freshman year. We bonded. I played football, they didn't. We ended up rooming together for 3 years, and they became my network group. Like we ended up in Atlanta. When I lived in Atlanta, we bought Smoothie Kings together, right? We did investment projects together. We weren't only good friends, but we decided we wanted to do business together. To me, which is further than saying I'm a good friend, right? You do business with somebody, you your family, right?
Oh
So
yeah.
yeah, so I think the network is important. The communication, developing the worth ethic is good, and start preparing now for tomorrow. And that's in every aspect. That's financially. Start being diligent about your money, and how much you save, what you do with your money. Now is the time to become an adult. And that happens with friends, with communication, with networking, with financial responsibility, and building out your plan. write it down, write down ideas and visions. Keandra, years ago, I'd started listening to real estate uh, podcast and all these people that were making millions of dollars off of real estate. I'm like, that is too complicated, right? It's really, really tough. Um, a few years ago, my wife and I decided, on top of everything else we were doing, we were gonna start investing in real estate, right? But it didn't happen overnight. We studied, we thought about it, we built a plan, and we jumped in and we did it smartly, and we're in a totally different position now with real estate investment. And it's one of those things where I'm always um, looking at ways that I can diversify personally my investments, but also make sure that my family, long after I'm gone, is well taken care of. Um, and that's I think that's the way you start that process right now.
Absolutely. And it's common in other cultures to have that generational wealth, but to try
Yeah.
to infuse it. And there are some very, strategic Black individuals who set up that generational wealth, but continuing with that mindset is awesome. All right, so the next question. If you had a crystal ball, what advice would you give to your younger self? So now you've gone through all of the challenges, all of the obstacles, everything. Any
Yeah.
advice you would reach back to tell that that kid sitting at Morehouse, football driven, and now what would you tell them?
Wow. I think it's more of a personal statement, right? I would definitely look back and say that if you first having faith in God and a grounded relationship in faith, that the things you believe are important today, and those obstacles that you don't feel like you'll get over, you'll make it.
Hmm.
Right. We spend, as young people, I did spend a lot of time stressing over things that in months and years we won't even remember.
Yeah, no.
So I think that's the first message. And then the second message is really about an encouragement, right? I mean, I think we always need to encourage ourselves. So it would be, I remember vividly being on campus in Atlanta, and it was my first Thanksgiving on campus because we were playing football over Thanksgiving, and I thought I'd be fine, right? I'm here, I've got my teammates, and it got really quiet. Um, and you do a lot of introspection on where you are, what's really going on, am I where I want to be? And I think, secondly, I'd probably just encourage myself that you're going to end up exactly where you're supposed to be, right? If you just stay focused, continue to be diligent, do the things you're supposed to do, you're going to end up exactly where you're supposed to be. So I think those are important. For me, that's what I would definitely go back to my younger self and probably say.
Yeah. Awesome. That's a pretty loaded question because it's like, do I tell which younger self are we talking
Right,
about? Your
right,
college younger
yeah.
self, or what are we doing here?
Right,
Okay.
right.
All right. So last student question is, do you find it hard being a Black male in a position of power in your role? Is it difficult for you, or does it feel like a natural fit?
Feels natural.
Okay.
It does. I don't think my position is, well, let me rephrase that. I think me being in this position feels natural. Um, do I think there were certain things that I did differently or extra to be here? Absolutely. Right. But I know that there is a different level of expectation and microscope on what I do. I'm not naive to think that that they're not biases, right? Because there are. But I also know that I'm qualified to be here, right? So again, that competitive nature kicks in, and I'm not going to go to a meeting unprepared. I'm not going to be, one of the VPs that gets on a call and has a subpar presentation of my strategy for 2021. That's just, and oh, by the way, I'm not the best at creating PowerPoints, right? I know what I want to do. So that means that I'm gonna go find the best group of people around me. And by the way, this is a true story. I actually, one of the people I chose to be on my strategy team was the MBA hire that nobody wanted. But I knew she thought differently. I knew she was creative, and I needed that perspective. Um, and so I pull really strong people around me. Um, and ultimately, I don't need all the credit, right? But what I do need to do is drive a product that exceeds expectation. And so, um, that competitive drive kicks in, and I always want to, at the end of the day, I just want to be the best, right? At whatever you give me, whatever I'm doing, I have to, I want to be the best, or I want to at least say I've done my best. Um, so yeah, it's different. It's difficult. I'm on Zoom calls from 7:30 in the morning to, I've got several after I finish this call, so about 7, 8 at night every day. Calls on the weekend. I probably have 50 emails that I haven't responded to yet that I'll have to do today. So for with everything you do, um, there is a commitment you have to make, but there's also a sacrifice you have to make. And so, when you say, I want to be a CEO, I want to be a VP, I want to do this, the question you really have to ask yourself is, what are you willing to sacrifice to do that, right? I was on the road pre-COVID for over 15 years, every week, Tuesday through Thursday. So I didn't get a chance to see Zion and Cleve and Zoe go to soccer practice, and I missed first days of school, and I couldn't help my wife around the house. But the question is, what do again, what do you sacrifice to be in the position that you want to be in? And a senior executive at IBM asked me that question years ago, and I thought I wanted a job that he was offering, and I said, I don't want it, right? I'm not willing to sacrifice my family, right? There's some things I'll sacrifice, but not my family. I'll stay where I am. And I think we'll have to answer that question through college and through the rest of our lives.
Well, I really appreciate you hanging out with me
Yeah,
this
this was good.
evening, and
Yeah.
you're dipping into either family time or one more Zoom call. But before we wrap up, any lasting words or anything you'd like to share with our students before we depart and give them some good encouragement as they are either wherever they are in their collegiate career.
Yeah, so I would just say to continue to strive for excellence in everything you do. And I mentioned that throughout the discussion because it's very important. And excellence isn't something you turn on or turn off. It's a muscle. You've got to develop it. You've got to exercise it. And if you start now, then it becomes easier later in life. So I would say develop that work ethic and principle of always operating in excellence in everything that you do. The other thing is about relationships. Develop those relationships. Get out of your comfort zone. Talk to that person that doesn't say much. You never know what that connection will bring. and how it will benefit and be rich to you and the other person. So continue to develop those relationships. And I'll leave you with with a quote. My dad used to always when he was younger, as a civil rights activist, after Emmett Till was murdered, he used to keep his Emmett Till's picture in his button-down shirt pocket, and he did that to always remind him of what he was fighting for, of what he was struggling to see for us, for our generation. And he used to always say to remember to shoot for the moon, because if you don't reach it, if you fail, you'll be among the stars. So I appreciate this opportunity. I welcome everyone to reach out to me via LinkedIn, Cleveland L. Sellers III at Capgemini. If you have any questions, happy to respond, comment, or talk to anybody that just wants to have a conversation. So, Ms. Mitchell, I appreciate the time and the opportunity and learning about you from the big city of Richmond and what you're doing in Pembroke. Continue to lead our young people, right? Because I think what you do is the most important, really the most important part of their lives, just imparting to them at this stage. So thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you. This has been an awesome interview, so thank you for joining and helping our students.
Yeah, thank you.